Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm Allison. This is where I'm from 105. Today Gina will be joining me. What have you been reading? I read this amazing book, which I know came out a couple of years ago, but I just read it now, by Bassi Ipkai. I really hope I said that right. I looked it up. I'm lying, but I'm telling the truth, which I love the title and this book cover. And I loved it. So that's what I'm reading. I hope you're reading something you love. I'm accepting your. Aha! Yes!
Hello.
I only had to accept it 3 times before you came
Oh,
through.
I'm just
So
I'm just happy it went through.
it did. How are you today, Gina?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me and thanks for reaching out. It's not always easy to reach out to people we don't know and say, hello, I wrote this poem. So
You're right.
good
I,
on you.
I'm a little bit like I made sure that I didn't read like I've been reading others and I made sure for the last couple of weeks I was like I'm not going to read anybody else's because I think that would just make me more nervous
I think it can get in people's heads. I
for sure.
I will agree that I think sometimes people read others and think, well, you know, maybe mine isn't, but that's not the point of this.
No, I know.
So,
Yes, I'm grateful to be here. So
well, I'm grateful you're here too. So, do you want to just
let
launch into it? What is the most comfortable for
yeah,
you?
I'll
Okay,
just it right now.
great.
All right. I am from built-in bookcases in antique-filled rooms, from pink popcorn bricks, red ropes, foggy summer mornings. I'm from calla lilies with soft satin petals, sour grass, and yellow flowers. From daisy chains constructed on grammar school lawns, eucalyptus trees, and Ramona the Brave. I am from an upholsterer turned truck driver, a homemaker turned bookkeeper, from hair rollers, scarves, Pall Malls, and Seagrams. I am from the Red Dotson hatchback and the faint smell of cigarettes, my mother's beautiful voice singing along to Top 40. I am from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, played on repeat, from a very, very, very fine house, but only one cat in the yard, whose name was Sally. I am from Creature Features on Fridays and Dad's Bisquick pancakes on Saturday, only if I had friends sleep over, or if it was my birthday. I am from the house on Oaks Boulevard where the steps seemed so tall, and across the street lived someone who I'll never forget, but not in a good way. I am from the house on Marlowe Drive with the long front yard, kick the can, doorbell ditch, huffy bicycles strewn about. I am from the house on Roxbury where sadness came to reside, the house I lived in when my mother died. I was just 15 years old, forever changed. I'm from Grandma Ella, teaching me piano, sharing sips of her Budweiser poured into a glass. Gina, you're growing too fast, she'd say, and always remember to dress like a lady. From Grandmother Doris, who was very distant and strange. I'm from camping in the Sierras, under the stars, horseback rides, raging rivers, and beautiful meadows. I am from heartbreak, hope, good intentions, forgiveness, a unique, colorful quilt created from the patchwork of life's experiences. Thank you.
Yes, wonderful.
I did it. And my voice only got shaky like through.
You did great. It's hard to read our own work, I think.
Because you read it and then so I wonder if other people do this. Like you read it and you're like, oh, I should have changed that, or I should have worded that differently, or you could constantly, I guess, edit your stuff.
Yes. I'm not going to quote it correctly, but someone said it's you're never finished. It just lets you go.
That makes
Like,
sense. Yeah.
you
So
know.
as many times as I've read this, I've done it every time. But I've made a deal with myself. I'm not going to touch it. It's staying this way. That's it.
Yeah.
Except for when my dad told me the first version, I had a Toyota, and he's like, it wasn't a Toyota, it was a Dodge. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right.
Isn't that funny?
He remembered. I had a Toyota in my head for some reason.
There were, well, I think it's because there aren't a lot of Datsuns anymore. Like
Oh,
that's a bygone thing, you
that,
know. When I see one, I'm like, oh, because you can every once in a while you'll see a really old one because that's the only kinds there are,
yeah,
and it,
you're
it
right.
reminds me. And Doorbell Ditch. Does anyone play that anymore? I actually wondered that, not in the
I,
so
well,
distant
I
past.
think there's some TikTok challenges
Oh,
out
of
there that I see
course there are.
people post next door about, but yeah, not
Next.
really whole thing. Yeah,
I feel like we really targeted one house with that game. At least we did. It was like this house that we were both, convinced was spooky or, had something going on, and we just wanted them to appear. And I
right.
don't know if they ever, I'm thinking about it. They lived across the street from us, and I don't know if I ever saw them.
Yeah, we had a house like that in our neighborhood too, and
Yeah.
that would walk around, and everybody had a story. Like everybody
Hmm.
had the story about the person, and we were all afraid of it. And he's probably just a normal everyday person.
Yeah.
As kids, we had
Yeah.
a story that we made up, like he was scary and his house was haunted, and
Hmm.
the imaginations of
Yeah, and they had like double doors, kind of like the Addams Family or How I Imagine, like the two doors in the front, like that seemed
yeah,
very majestic or spooky or something. And
right,
this was before the days when people had second and third homes, like people lived in their homes. And I
right.
think now people are just like, oh, well, they don't live there, you know.
Yeah, some some of that, and I think also people just don't come outside very often anymore.
I
People
know.
leave, come in their garage, and then they stay inside.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, anyway, I loved it, and there were so many little things. I mean, it's such a joy for me listening to these because either I have the experience of, oh, I remember that, or I have the experience of like, this is amazing. I didn't think of this, So either way, it works for me. But we have a lot of. You grew up in California,
Mhm.
yeah, so we have a lot of overlap with just the things that happened and just going to the Sierras and just all of those. So it was a trip down memory lane for me too. But what was the experience like for you writing it?
So when I wrote it, I think it was in February, and I was sick with COVID, and I was super sick for a couple days, and then I on the mend. Came across it, Find Your Harbor, which
Yeah.
I submitted a little piece of writing, memorial tattoo for her.
Yeah.
That's how I found you,
Yeah.
and I saw it, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a neat thing, and I love to write. I don't do a lot of it usually, but so I was like, I'm going to try it. So I sat on the couch, and I took a couple hours, and a couple hours. I did a couple different versions, but can you tell I don't write? It took me a couple hours to write that.
That's not any, it can take anyone as long as they want. And also some people do lots of versions, and that's part of what I love about it. I've sort of made this promise that I'm going to do a different one every year, like as a sort of reflection or whatever exercise. And I've done two so far, and they're different.
Yeah.
Like,
For me, it was nice to sit and like it made me think about things that I normally don't think about. And I think also, I don't know if it's just a getting older thing or if it's because my mom died young and when I was young, and I blocked out certain, like I feel like I've lost some memories. Like
yeah.
I don't think about certain periods of time that often.
Yeah.
So this kind of made me think about some things that I normally don't think about or that I've pushed out, and to think about little details too, like the steps on the house, because I've driven by that house a million times, in my adult years, and I look at the steps and I think I don't remember thinking those were so big. There's like 5 steps or something. So small.
I love that line because there's so many experiences like that where you revisit something from your childhood and you're like, oh, that's just normal
Yeah,
size. I was just very small.
it was
Um,
small.
yeah.
Yeah, so things like that, and thinking about like in grammar school making, my teacher um, would read Ramona the Brave
Yeah.
to us, and she would always insert my name because she said I reminded her of Ramona, so she would insert my name in certain certain parts of the book, like when she was reading it. And, as a kid, you feel like so special
Yes.
because
Oh,
your
that's very
teacher,
sweet.
pointing you out. But anyway, so it was kind of therapeutic for me to sit and just kind of remember some of the things that I've kind of forgotten about, and to kind of make myself feel better about, okay, I am able to remember if I really think, and sweet things like my mom singing in the car, and her Carpenters were her favorite. She would sing Carpenter song in the car, and I would think, oh my gosh, how, like, she should be a singer. Like, her voice to me was like so amazing. And a little side note to that. So I have a daughter who's 27 now, but she's an amazing singer. So it's like, oh, well, I know where you got that from. Part of that is from my mom, because I always thought she had an amazing voice. So anyway, it was therapeutic. It was fun to do. And I like your idea of doing one every year, because it like I said, if it makes you think about things that maybe you've forgotten, and it's fun to look back and go, okay, and to read others, and like you said, to look at others and say, oh yeah, that I remember that. Like, I remember, like, the pink popcorn bricks, going to Don Castro. It's a little swimming, man-made swimming place that we used to go as kids, and they would sell those pink popcorn bricks. I had forgotten all about that, like, until I started, like, what did I do when I was young? Where did we go? So anyway, it was, I loved it.
I'm so glad. I think it's a muscle too, remembering. I find that the more we don't really sit down much and just think about things.
Right.
That's not the life we live in now. And for me, it's a good excuse to sit and think, like, about those details, those sensory details that I might not key into. And the more that I remember, the more I remember. I mean, it's one of those things. And my brother died when I was 10, so I'm still remembering things now about that time, and there's something comforting about it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of how I felt too, because at at 15, you're at an age where you're breaking away. Like, you don't have anything to do with your parent. Like, you are trying to break away. You're kind of a jerk, like most teenagers are at that stage. Like, you just. And then my mom dies, and then I'm like, my mom died at probably the worst time in my youth, when I'm a jerk. So she died, and so I remember thinking, like, she'll never. As I got older and I turned out to be a decent human, I'm like, I wish she could have seen me turn out to be a decent human. Like, so I think for quite a few years after she died, I do have a hard time remembering, like, anything good. Like, all I remember are all the bad memories. Like, those come up really easily. So it's nice to sit and try to find those good, because there are good memories in there. You just, in a traumatic time, that's where your brain goes. So,
Yes. And I'm sure, as a mother, she knew you were a good person.
yes.
She knew you were going to turn out just the way you did. She loved you.
Yeah. But as a kid, you're
No,
like,
I
oh.
get it. I get it for sure. But I think they can be an opportunity in having children of our own to, like, look back and go, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Like,
you understand a little more, and
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because
And even just hanging out with 10-year-olds, like, wow, I was this old. Like, because of course, I'm sure you had a similar experience I've found with most people who have lost. Like, you felt old at
right,
15
right,
and very mature and capable. I felt old at 10,
right.
like, oh, I was essentially a grown up. No, I wasn't.
I know.
10-year-olds are not essentially grown ups. But it took me hanging out with one a lot to realize that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, they're still little kids.
Like, wow, I really, like, that was so young.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
10 is even, like, just emotionally, like, there's so much growth happens from,
Yeah.
And yeah, you look back as an adult, you're like, wow, no wonder I couldn't handle certain things.
Hmm.
You
Yeah. And 15, I think you even more think you're grown
oh,
up. Like, oh, I'm grown. Like, this shouldn't bother me as much as it does, or some nonsense that we tell ourselves to survive.
ex-
Uh,
ex- yes,
but yeah. And I also think having lost younger, you think like, oh, is this life now? I had a bunch of loss in a row too. So it was like, oh, everyone's going to die. Like I really just sort of felt like, oh, I mean, we all are going to die, obviously, but,
right.
and more quickly.
But you have that more in the forefront, like
Yeah.
you're waiting for the next
Yeah.
person,
Yep.
and you have a very um, intimate knowledge of how people leave,
Yeah.
and so you kind of you're just waiting, like you said, you're waiting for the next.
Yeah.
It's fun.
No. No. So it is, and also I think too for me, and you may have experienced this as well, like, everyone's like being normal, your friends, and it's very like dissonant. Like they're just going on with their lives, but you've
Right.
had this whole thing happen and they don't know what you're talking about or what you've been through. And
Did you find that you didn't want people to know when you were young?
I think at first I sort of wanted them to know because I wanted them to see like, oh, this happened. This explains what I'm feeling, and in a way, it sort of was a good cover for other things that I was going through. Like, oh,
Right.
see, I'm sad because this happened. But then people's reactions were so not helpful
Mm-hmm.
that then it was like, oh, forget it. Like I just don't even want to talk about it because you're just gonna like laugh because you're 10 and you can't process
You're right.
it at all.
Right.
And then I'm gonna feel like apologetic. It just gets so awkward and weird and you have no tools
Right.
like that. What about you?
I think, well, I don't think, I know. For me, it happened during the summer. So when
Same.
I was going to be a junior
Oh
in high
wow.
school, I wanted
Jeez.
nobody to know. I wanted nobody to feel sorry for me. I didn't want anybody. Like my biggest fear was I was going to go to school and people were going to look at me funny and they'd be like, "Oh, that's the girl whose mom died." And it was like the worst thing. I didn't want anybody to do, "I'm sorry," like I didn't want it because then it also would remind me that it
Yes.
happened. So
Yeah.
I didn't know it happened, but
Hmm.
um, it would be, it was too hard. I didn't want to talk about it, which
And the conversations you were having probably weren't helpful anyway. So it's
it,
not like
now you're right. Exactly. Yeah. So that was how I felt. I just wanted to go on like nothing. I didn't want to be different, and I was different. I didn't know anybody else whose mom died. Um, you know, during I think my circle of friends anyway, and then
right.
even acquaintances. I didn't know anybody.
And you said in your bio that you did some counseling for grief camp, which I don't think existed when we were going through this.
No,
And it seems like an incredible resource. What was that like for
yeah.
you?
So I had volunteered for, it was called Camp Aaron at the time. They've changed the name, but I saw a documentary that I watched, and it was about this children's grief camp, and I cried through the whole thing. It's like I have to volunteer for this. Like I wish that this was something that was available when I was going through what I was going through. And I don't know at 15 if I would have immediately,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I was trying to avoid the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe I would have, um, with some encouragement, I would have
Mm-hmm.
maybe taken advantage of it. But I just knew it was important. And of course, being young, when you lose somebody, you have this, when somebody else loses somebody at the age around you were, or even just children in general, for me, it's like it gets my heart. So,
Yeah.
so I went, I volunteered. It was in Santa Cruz, and I, um, they put you through this
Yeah.
little like
Yeah.
training, and you have to bring a picture of your loved one who
Oh,
passed, somebody important to you. And it was super emotional,
yeah.
but it was also super it felt good. Like it felt good to be around others. So so even in my training, I remember thinking like these children are it's gonna be so amazing for them to experience this because they are with other people who have experienced a loss of, it was like grandparents, parents, siblings, like anybody, like, I mean, super close or important to these children. And it was amazing. And these kids, you know, of course it's a sad thing. They would do these little ceremony, like they did like a little candle lighting ceremony, and they all got to write a little thing about their loved one. And but they also had fun, and they also made friends. A lot of the campers I've read over the years have gone to this camp, and then they become involved in the camp, and then they become counselors. And there's a few children's grief camps now, but yeah, not when we were
No, no. And even if it had, it definitely wouldn't have been for siblings, to be honest. You know, it would have just been like parent. And it's grief is very complicated. I think it's taken me decades to really even just like accept the effect that it has had on my life. I mean, it's an ongoing process, but you know.
I think that's the thing, right? So many people expect, like, well, especially the people who haven't gone through a hard loss, they expect you know, it's been 40 years since my mom has passed. You should be feeling that way, or you should be over it, or you should be like, why does it still come up? Like, they don't understand, you know, exactly how that is. But also it becomes like, it's who I am. It's part of who I am. Like, that loss defined so many things. Like, it made me experience things that I wouldn't have normally experienced, good and bad. And it's made me who I am today.
Yeah.
And that's right. All the good and the bad. It's where you are.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm glad that you found me through Margot.
Yeah.
She's wonderful, and all the resources that she's put together are just like amazing and
Right.
so comprehensive. And I've gotten to know her daughter actually, because obviously her brother died, so we have that in common.
Right.
And so I'm grateful for that relationship too, because she's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's funny, and I don't know her personally, and I just found her on but we ended up, my husband's cousin's wife knows her. Like, they've so there's a so anyway, so it's a small world.
It is a small world. Well, any other last thoughts before we wrap up, Gina?
I appreciate you having me, and I really enjoyed flexing my memory muscle.
Yeah.
Writing.
Yeah.
Yes. It was fun. And I am going to do, like you said,
yes,
every year. I'm going to write.
Please do, and send it to me. I will read it. Okay. Well, thank you, Gina. This has been a real pleasure.
Yes.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Okay. Thank you. And thank you to all of Gina's friends for joining and saying all lots of nice things. I don't know if you saw it, but they said, great job. You're wonderful. You know, all kinds of true things. So,
well, okay. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Same. Bye.